Thank you all for coming to the second iteration of this year's Huggins Lectures. Professor Ogletree appeared yesterday and was going to be appearing today and tomorrow to talk about President Obama. I'm Kenneth Mack, Professor Ogletree's colleague on the Harvard Law School faculty, and it's my easy task today to introduce Charles Ogletree, because of course in this audience, very few of you need to be introduced to Charles Ogletree. He is, of course, the Jesse Clemenko Professor of Law at Harvard Law School. Before that, he had a distinguished career as a criminal defense lawyer. He's a founding and executive director of the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice. He's a graduate of Stanford University and Harvard Law School, and the recipient of awards too numerous to mention in this all too brief introduction. He's the author of many books, including When Law Fails, Making Sense of Miscarriages of Justice, From Lynch Mobs to the Killing State, Race and the Death Penalty in America, and Presumption of Guilt, the Arrest of Henry Louis Gates, Jr., and Race, Class, and Crime in America. So what else is there to say about Charles Ogletree? I think actually what one could say about Professor Ogletree is best encapsulated in something that a White House staffer said to me earlier this year when I brought up Tree's name. And he said, Tree is our conduit to grumpy folks, to the discontented. What did he mean by that? I think what he meant by that is that Tree is President Obama's and many, many people's conduit to people who believe that the civil rights struggle lies unfinished. And if there's any proposition to which Tree has dedicated his life, it is that proposition that the civil rights struggle remains unfinished. It's not self-evident that a well-placed law professor, as Tree is, an ambitious law professor at a prestigious law school should think and act this way. And in that regard, I might note that just 3 weeks ago, Richard Thompson Ford of Stanford Law School, another scholar of race and the law, published a book called Rights Gone Wrong, in which Professor Ford takes on the civil rights establishment for overreaching in the aftermath of Brown and trying to apply the discrimination paradigm to a wide range of phenomena in American society. So if you're an ambitious scholar of race and the law today, perhaps it's a safer course to orient yourself as a critic of the civil rights paradigm as it applies to American society today. Charles Ogletree has chosen not to do this. And even, in fact, the subject of Professor Ogletree's talk, President Obama, has himself, in some measure, defined himself as an alternative or a successor to the civil rights paradigm. President Obama famously proclaimed himself a member of the Joshua generation, a generation that came of age after the civil rights triumphs of the 1960s. And in fact, he's defined the post-civil rights role of a black politician, right? He acts different than the black politicians who came before him precisely because he is not a child of the civil rights movement. And, you know, in some measure, that's the safer course to take in modern day America. And as a matter of fact, I'm probably in my own writings, in my own book that I'm writing right now, I'm probably orienting myself more on that side of the line than on the civil rights, the traditional civil rights side of the line. But it takes courage to do what Charles does, which is to take unpopular stands, to speak for and to the discontented, to speak for and to those folks who think that the civil rights paradigms have continuing relevance in American society and that the work of the movement remains unfinished. So, with that all too brief introduction, I give you Charles Ogletree, Jesse Clemenko Professor of Law at Harvard Law School.
First, let me thank my colleague and friend, Ken Mack. Ken is a real critical part of the mass of critical thinkers at the Harvard Law School, and I've known Ken since his days as a student. He was a classmate of Barack Obama, Harvard Law Review mate of Barack Obama, a competitor for the Harvard Law Review presidency of Barack Obama, and an incredibly resourceful supporter and surrogate for Barack Obama during the campaign. We were both on the campaign trail a lot of 2007, 2008. And Ken could go to areas that I could not go to. I didn't go to southern Pennsylvania and eastern Pennsylvania. That was a tough territory. Ken not only knew people there, grew up there, but wrote things in newspapers that I found unimaginable that I would write. And he made a big difference in getting people to understand and support and ultimately vote for Barack Obama after, I'll talk about some of the President Obama's remarks and that got him in a little bit of hot water in Pennsylvania. And he has been, close with the president. He was there at Grant Park on November 4th when he won the presidency in 2008. We both have been with him since then, and it's just remarkable to have him here. I also saw somewhere my colleague Randy Kennedy, who just wrote a phenomenal book about Barack Obama, and I hope you all will get it, because it really not only gives a remarkable perspective on Obama and how to deal with some of the issues I'm talking about, but also talks about his own father, talks about Jeremiah Wright. I'll say a little bit about Jeremiah Wright today, but Randy Kennedy really elucidated some of the issues about Jeremiah Wright to understand him, the complexity of him, the same way I talked about yesterday, the complexity of Barack Obama, and to see him as well. And my dear friend, Professor William Julius Wilson, who we stole from Chicago. I told you Chicago had a lot of stars, right? And here's another one. And he's been here, and we're very happy with that. And he and I think a result of our tenure, both taught courses last year and this year on the HBO series The Wire, because we both see how it talks about a broad set of issues that are commonplace in our society, and it's often misunderstood as a teaching and learning tool and something that Harvard students in particular can benefit from. And I've been impressed by the number of students who have used it as part of their efforts in public service, which is very important. And Skip, thank you again for carrying this lecture series on and honoring the legacy of Nate Huggins, who we all miss from his remarkable role here. And ironically, last night I met in your office Archie Epps' son, who's doing some work on his father, another legendary Harvard member who actually wrote some remarkable articles and books about Malcolm X's speeches and other interactions here at Harvard. So I'm glad to see that legacy continuing. So last night, I just want to try to do what I did last night and to say that these lectures are divided into 3 different time periods. It doesn't mean that the book will be in that same order, but the first time period last night, I talked about the young Obama growing up and how race was an interesting and conflicting and nuanced issue in his life, from his mother making him understand the black experience to his father being absent all of his life except one visit, and him actually changing his name from Barry, the comfortable name that people of African descent used, and as opposed to Barack, which he thought as a, his father thought as a Kenyan, people wouldn't understand how to say it or when to say it. And Barack was called Barry for a long time, and then he just rejected it as part of his racial identity. His mother, I say, should be given much, much credit for his embracing of the black experience when she told him about everything about the civil rights movement. And he sort of dismissed it at first, but you can see it made a big difference. And I ended last night talking about one of the more remarkable moments in his life, and that was when the second-year student, Ken Mack, remembers it, at Harvard Law School, was the president of Harvard Law Review, and he was given the task of introducing Professor Derek Bell, a teacher and mentor to us all, who was protesting and striking because Harvard had not hired a woman of color to a tenured position on the faculty by 1990. And he first arrived there in 1969. He left 3 times. Derek never stayed long at Harvard, or any other place. And he was introduced by Barack Obama. And what I didn't say, which is very important, he introduced him to thunderous applause that day in the plaza at Harvard Law School. But he called Derek Bell the Rosa Parks of the legal profession. And it's hard to imagine a higher honor than to have the black president of the Harvard Law Review recognize the black professor first tenured at Harvard Law School. and to recognize, even if he was not his students, his incredible writing. Tonight I'm taking a very different turn. Some of you should be familiar with some of this, and so it's not just history. But the larger thesis is this, that the issue of race has become more complicated, more nuanced, and very difficult from the time Barack was born and came to Harvard in 1988 and graduated in 1991 to now when he's serving as President of the United States of America. And tomorrow I'll talk about some of those things he tried to dodge and miss in running for office in the 2000 era. He has been confronted again and again and again every time the issue of race is raised in some respects. And tomorrow you'll see some of the dynamic and pretty personal ways in which race has impacted his growth as a public official and how important it's been and what he's been able to do. I wanted to start by just finishing a little bit what I talked about last night. What's amazing is that I have read over and over and over and over again then Senator Obama's speech to the Democratic National Convention here in Boston in July 2004. And he was adorned by Democrats. They thought he was the greatest thing next to Jesus. He was that significant, and he was just highly praised because of both the power of his voice and the manner of which he spoke. But I went back, and I was here, and it was interesting to see the red meat version of the earlier speech given by Reverend Al Sharpton, who was terrific. I mean, he gave a remarkable address there. But, you know, the Democrats didn't want him in front, right? So, you know, he gave the speech and everybody loved every moment of it. They gave him 7 minutes and he took 20. And somebody was saying, stop him. No, he's on a roll, man. Let him go, let him go. And he pumped up the Democrats about all these issues about the difference between an elephant and a horse. And he made it clear which one he's going to ride that donkey a little bit longer. It was just a classic address that set the tone for then Senator Obama's address. Remember, Senator Obama was Illinois and really a Chicago creature in 2004. He was not national in any sense. And so him giving the stage before he's elected, he's not a senator yet. In July 2004, he's still running. And as I said yesterday, he was very, very, very fortunate. He's smart, he's witty, he's strategic, but he had a lot of luck because Democrats who had more money and had more support sort of failed during the process of the primary. Much stronger Republican candidate for the Senate bowed out because of personal issues, and Barack won. He did have competition. I shouldn't ignore his name. He had the Republican nominee was Alan Keyes, right? Coming from Maryland, having run for president. And I remember the things he said. One of his first stomp speeches, he said, Barack Obama is a murderer because he believes in abortion. So you can see how the issues were going to be joined in Illinois. And I would say being president was clearly Barack Obama's favorite moment in his life, other than his wife and his children being married and burned. And his second favorite moment was beating Alan Keyes, getting 70% of the vote in Illinois in 2004. So that was very important. But part of this issue of race and Obama has some deep roots, and I want to talk a little bit about that today. And the more I read it, and I'm happy to discuss it and debate it and learn from it, his 2004 speech to me was less about the Democrats as a party and more about what I believe is deep in his soul, the idea to try to bring everybody together. It was aimed at, I would say, centrists, even though the Democrats heard it and applauded it. And he moved away from all these issues. And I can remember, I'm sure all of you were applauding, whether you were listening or not, but it's hard to misunderstand the significance of what he had to say. He said, not even as we speak, there are those who are preparing to divide us, the spin masters and negative ad peddlers who embrace the politics of anything goes. Well, I say to them tonight, there's not a liberal America and a conservative America, there's the United States of America. That's a very centrist point of view. There's not a black America and white America and Latino America and Asian America, there's the United States of America, moving toward the center. He goes even further. See, go into the collar counties around Chicago and people will tell you they don't want their tax money wasted by a welfare agency or by the Pentagon. Go into an inner city neighborhood and folks will tell you that government alone can't teach kids to learn. The pundits like to slice and dice our country into red states and blue states, red states for Republicans, blue states for Democrats, but I've got news for them too. We worship an awesome God in the blue states, and we don't like federal agents poking around our libraries in the red states. We coach a little league in the blue states, and yes, we've got some gay friends in the red states. This whole idea that we all are part of an America that shouldn't be divided based on politics, the red and blue are Democrat versus Republicans. And here's that really captured it. There are patriots who oppose the war in Iraq. There are patriots who oppose the war. There are patriots who supported the war in Iraq. We are one people, all of us pledging allegiance to the stars and stripes, all of us defending the United States of America. And that's why this speech could not have been more powerful, and it was the moment in which he really arrived. The day after that speech, my dear friend Skip Gates and I sort of tricked him. He was going to the vineyard to relax and rest. And Skip said, Tree, invite him over to the house. First we invited him to the public forum we hosted in 2004. Told him he didn't have to say anything, he could just come. And then he came in, everybody started, I said, here's Barack Obama. And they went crazy, and of course he had to speak, right? And then we kept him another day when he's supposed to be on vacation, and he and Michelle came to Skip's, we call it the White House on Martha's Vineyard, and had a very important meeting for him to see the folks who were not at the Democratic National Convention, the folks who were across the nation, not just from Massachusetts. And it was a real important event for all of us then. None of us recognized in 2004, after he had been so successful in a worldwide campaign, a national campaign, what would happen just 2 years later. And that is when the talk first started about, who is Barack Obama and whether he can actually run for office. And as you'll see, almost every one of the people who criticized him about race were African Americans. It's very interesting. You never heard this criticism about Al Sharpton. You never heard it about Jesse Jackson. You didn't really hear it about Shirley Chisholm or Julian Bond, but it was interesting the way in which Barack Obama was viewed very powerfully by folks with power and access to the media to talk about Barack Obama. 2006 and 2007, for Stanley Crouch, what Barack Obama isn't, quote, Colin, black like me. So when black Americans refer to Obama as one of ours, I do not know what they are talking about. In his new book, The Audacity of Hope, Obama makes it clear that while he has experienced some light versions of typical racial stereotypes, he cannot claim those problems as his own, nor has he lived the life of a black American. Very strong and very critical. Deborah Dickerson, who I must hasten to add was a student of mine, wrote an article for Salon magazine in early 2007, before he announced in later 2007. And she said Barack Obama would be the great black hope in the next presidential race if he were actually black. Black in our political and social reality means those descended from West African slaves. Voluntary immigrants of African descent, even those descended from West Indian slaves, are just that, voluntary immigrants of African descent with markedly different outlooks on the role of race in their lives and in politics. To say that Obama isn't black is merely to say that by virtue of his white American mom and his Kenyan dad, who abandoned both him and America, he is an American of African immigrant extraction. So you can see it growing. The whole idea is that who is this guy? He's not black enough to be an African American candidate. And I still say, to just remove some doubt, he really was the first black president. I know some of you think it was somebody else, but he really was, in fact, the first. And he confronted race in every aspect of the campaign. And it's not unusual. This was not about just racism against Barack Obama. And some of it was intended as humor, but in fact, it was a person who had great standing and great character and great ability and great accomplishments, the former First Lady and the senator from New York, Hillary Clinton. She was a very important candidate. And in fact, if you go and look, I didn't give you all the data given the time constraints. If you look at almost every straw poll in early 2007 and 2008, Hillary Clinton overwhelmingly beat Barack Obama from state to state to state to state, because she had national recognition, good and bad, but it was national recognition. The campaign strategy for those of us who work with him, we're going to focus on Iowa. We're going to focus on North Carolina, on New Hampshire. We're going to focus on South Carolina with the idea that he had to win one of the early states in order to be recognized as a serious candidate. And some of you may have forgotten this. I'm going to ask for Brittany and Derek's help to make sure I'm playing these right. But what's interesting is that he found himself in very deep despair. Do I have it here? When he decided to run with people like Andrew Young, the former ambassador, a former mayor of Atlanta, a great supporter of the Clintons who, he worked for Bill Clinton. And I want you to hear what he said when he's commenting on Barack or Hillary. And he made the mistake of mentioning Bill Clinton. Let's take a look at it.
Hillary Clinton, first of all, has Bill behind him. And Bill is every bit as black as Barack. He's probably gone with more black women than Barack.
See, I'm not sure how much that helps Bill Clinton, but you can see he was comfortable talking about race about Barack in a disparaging way. He's not really the candidate. And this was to a very mixed audience, but the whole idea was Bill Clinton is blacker than Barack Obama, and therefore Hillary Clinton, being connected to Bill Clinton, is a better candidate. And Bob Johnson, and let me just play this one. And then Bob Johnson had a similar motive. You may remember Bob Johnson was the CEO of BET, Black Entertainment Television. He said, this is not black education television, it's entertainment. That's why we have hip hop music. We're not there to entertain people, educate people, we're there to entertain it. So he was a supporter of Hillary Clinton, and here he spoke at a rally.
Now let me tell you something that the Barack campaign is saying about Hillary, and this thing about Martin Luther King. Now, they're implying that because Hillary said that Lyndon Johnson enacted much of the legislation that the civil rights marchers bled for, and some died for, as a moral crusade. Let me say this. Martin Luther King himself said, you can't legislate morality, but you can regulate behavior. You can't legislate morality, but you can regulate behavior. So what Dr. King was saying is, I'm going to make a moral crusade out of the fact that people should have equal access to housing, equal access to education, equal access to the ballot box. That's a moral crusade. But in this nation, moral crusades, whether it's the right of women to vote, whether it's the right of African Americans to vote, had to be written into law. That is the way the legislative process works in this nation, and that takes political leadership. That's all Hillary was saying. And to me, as an African American, I am, frankly, insulted that the Obama campaign would imply that we are so stupid that we would think Hillary and Bill Clinton, who have been deeply and emotionally involved in black issues, when Barack Obama was doing something in the neighborhood that I won't say what he was doing, but he said it in his book, when they have been involved, to say that these two people would denigrate the accomplishments of civil rights marchers, men and women who were hosed, beaten, and bled, and some died, to say, and to expect us now all of a sudden to say, we are attacking a black man? I mean, that kind of campaign behavior does not resonate with me for a guy who says, I want to be a reasonable, likable Sidney Poitier, guess who's coming to dinner?
It goes on. You can see the racial implications, right? Now, it's subtle, right? When he was out in the neighborhood doing what he said he was doing in his book, we know he said, yeah, I used to smoke dope. I used dope when I was a kid. And he actually said during the campaign, unlike others, I actually inhaled, right? That's right. And so putting it out there, right? But you see how, as a black man, I'm insulted that he has any credibility. It came even more directly in 2007. This is Tavis Smalley's program, and I'm sitting and not being questioned. Skip, you may remember this. This is the comments of our dear friend that we talked about last night, Cornel West. Oops, I'll go back one. I think it skipped once. Oops. This was when Tavis asked Cornel why Barack was in Springfield announcing his run for presidency and not with the folks, the black folks in Virginia in February 2007. Not at Tavis's event. You see, State of Black America, Tavis Smiley presents. And you can't see Tavis, but then Cornel's called on. It's taken a while to open up for some reason.
Look, Obama is a very decent, brilliant, charismatic brother. There's no doubt about that. The problem is that he's got folk who are talking to him who warrant our distrust. Precisely because we know that him going to Springfield the same day Brother Tavis has set this up for a whole year, we already know then that him coming out there is not fundamentally about us. It's about somebody else.
And so he makes that whole point, and I cut this because he said, I want to know where he's getting his money, I want to know who he's with, etc. The whole condemnation. This can't be a real brother. He would be here in Virginia, you know, in February 2007, as opposed to being at his home state where he was a senator from Illinois. And Cornel, in a sense, grabbed him. And after the session, I did say, I'm not sure, that you know, Barack Obama was my student, so was his wife Michelle, so was Ron Sullivan, who introduced me last night, his wife Stephanie. They're all very committed to these issues. Barack Obama had a racial profiling law, he did all these things, etc. And after the session, I said, Cornel came and said, oh, I didn't know that was your boy, Tree. I didn't know that was your boy. I want to meet him. So Cornel was actually very active in the Obama campaign and helped us through 2007 and 8 in some of the preparations for Senator Obama's campaigns and speeches and debates for president. He's turned the leaf since then. We'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow. But the point I was trying to make is that these ads and the subtle issue of race is not new with Obama. And some of you may remember this with Harold Ford about race and gender. It'll come up? Okay. When he ran for the Senate in Tennessee and was doing quite well. And this ad by his opponent turned out to be quite effective and subtly talking about issues of race and gender.
Harold Ford looks nice. Isn't that enough? Terrorists need their privacy.
When I die, Harold Ford will let me pay taxes again.
Ford's right. I do have too many guns.
I met Harold at the Playboy party.
I'd love to pay higher marriage taxes.
Canada can take care of North Korea. They're not busy.
So we took money from porn movie producers. I mean, who hasn't?
The Republican National Committee is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Call me up, right? So you can see how wide that has played. And at the same time, if you go back, one of the first, and it was pretty devastating, remember Harvey Gantt, the former mayor of Charlotte, a remarkable person who was really a strong candidate for the Senate, replacing Jesse Helms in North Carolina until Helms had this ad, and it doesn't say anything about race, but does it have a subtle race implication that comes in politics?
You needed that job, and you were the best qualified, but they had to give it to a minority because of a racial quota. Is that really fair? Harvey Gantt says it is. Gantt supports Ted Kennedy's racial quota law that makes the color of your skin more important than your qualifications. You'll vote on this issue next Tuesday. For racial quotas, Harvey Gantt. Against racial quotas, Jesse Helms.
It's amazing. America lost a great public servant when Harvey Gantt didn't get the chance to serve the people of North Carolina. It just gives you a sense of how race can be very much cutting edge. And so those are some of the predecessors to things that happened in this campaign. And here's what, there are thousands of things like this. I just took a few. And their February 26th debate in Ohio, and I'm not critical of Hillary Clinton. I supported the Clintons both times, and I'm a very big fan of Hillary. And here's where it's the subtle race-religion play. You can call it something else. It's politics. But they were talking about Farrakhan, and Barack says, yes, I know Reverend Farrakhan. He lives in Chicago. I've met him before. I've rejected him and his unfavorable things, inflammable things he said about Jews and others, and he is not part of my campaign. Hillary jumped in and said, there's a difference between denouncing and rejecting. And I think when it comes to this sort of, inflammatory, I have no doubt that everything that Barack just said is absolutely sincere, but I just think we've got to be even stronger. We can't let anyone in any way say these things because of the implications that they have, which can be so far-reaching. And here was one of Barack's finer moments. There's no formal offer of help from Farrakhan that would involve me rejecting it. But if the word reject, Senator Clinton feels is stronger than the word denounce, then I'm happy to concede the point, and I would reject and denounce Farrakhan, right? The whole sense that that's not getting a debate. Whatever you want, I'm going to give it to you. We're going to move on from this issue. And here is the sort of the linchpin, and it's more along the lines of religion than race. And this is the inflammatory language used by Reverend Jeremiah Wright that sort of almost brought the campaign down. And these were shown over and over again. And it's interesting, I would urge you to go back and hear the entire sermons of Jeremiah Wright, because the networks were very crafty in showing these 30-second sound bites and said, wow, that's inflammatory. Well, what is he talking about? Well, I don't know. I didn't watch it. I just saw this clip on Fox News. And then everybody picked it up. And it is inflammatory if you look at it just at these words.
Where governments lie, God does not lie. Where governments change, God does not change. And I'm through now. But let me leave you with one more thing. Governments fail. The government in this text, comprised of Caesar, Quirinius, Pontius Pilate, Pontius Pilate. The Roman government failed. The British government used to rule from east to west. The British government had a Union Jack. She colonized Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and Hong Kong. Her navies ruled the 7 seas all the way down to the tip of Argentina in the Falklands. But the British government failed. The Russian government failed. The Japanese government failed. The German government failed. And the United States of America government, when it came to treating her citizens of Indian descent fairly, she failed. She put them on reservations. When it came to treating her citizens of Japanese descent fairly, she failed. She put them in internment prison camps. When it came to treating the citizens of African descent fairly, America failed. She put them in chains. The government put them on slave quarters, put them on auction blocks, put them in cotton fields, put them in inferior schools, put them in substandard housing, put them in scientific experiments, put them in the lowest paying jobs, put them outside the equal protection of the law, kept them out of their racist bastions of higher education, and locked them into positions of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America? No, no, no. Not God Bless America. God damn America, that's in the Bible, for killing innocent people. God damn America, for treating her citizens as less than human. God damn America, as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
Now, it's interesting, yes, Barack Obama was not there, to just make that clear for history. But you can see the inflammatory nature if you take part of that. And this is not a someone who is an apologist for Reverend Jeremiah Wright, but you can see how it struck a chord with that audience that the government has failed those poor people who expected more from the government, and governments who disrespect people, whether it's in Japan or Germany or any other part of the world, that's what's going to happen. And you can see how people were drawn to that in some sense, but it became an issue because that became the divisive. How could Barack Obama be baptized in that church, have his children baptized in that church, married by Reverend Jeremiah Wright, be a member with this racist, venal preacher saying what he says that clearly is not what Barack believes in. And then he gave, I think, one of the more interesting speeches of his life. I'm not going to play the speech at all, but what's amazing is that this is what everybody calls the race speech. And what's interesting about it, if you think about it, this was not an issue to win the campaign. Because if you go back and actually look and listen to the speech, it was about Barack Obama's vision about race in America. Not about being elected, that was the afterthought, but the reality was that he was saying, I'm going to tell you who I am. And I thought that, you know, he said, I'm a kid, my mother's white from Kansas, my father is African from Kenya. This could only happen to me in a place like America, that I could be given this opportunity to run for office. He talked about his great-grandfather who was a veteran and fought in the wars. He talked about race in that context. But here's the lines that became what people embraced and what some rejected. And this is after Jeremiah Wright had said all that he'd said. He said in that speech, I can no more disown him, Jeremiah Wright, than I can disown the black community. It's a pretty powerful thing to say, that after all that, I can't disown him. I can no more disown him than I can my white grandmother, a woman who helped raise me, a woman who sacrificed again and again for me, a woman who loves me as much as she loves anything in this world, but a woman who once confessed her fear of black men, who passed by her on the street, and who on more than one occasion had uttered racial or ethnic stereotypes that make me cringe. These people are part of me, and they are a part of America, this country that I love. Now, it's interesting, and Skip's in that class too, who says, man, he's just put his grandmother under the bus. Threw her under and ran over. Skip and Rush Limbaugh had the same point of view. Right. Well, it's true, right? Rush Limbaugh said he ran over his grandmother and then backed up and ran over again, right? Right. He only ran over. Right. But you can see how him trying to say race is a black and white issue, and we shouldn't narrow it or compartmentalize it so that we ignore the fact that it happens. And what I didn't put in here was a remarkable thing he said. I understand how whites are feeling when their children are not admitted to a school and they're wondering whether there's some program that gives someone unlike them a preference because of their race or ethnicity. So he, in a sense, would recognize that people unlike him might view anything that the government did for others in a different point of view, and he addressed that. And then finally, after Jeremiah Wright went to the NAACP in Detroit, and then the National Press Club, where he gave a shout out to the brothers in his fraternity, among other things, it was then that Barack said, enough, right? And he ultimately resigned. And I have to tell you, it couldn't have been easy, right? I mean, think about it, the guy who was your sort of spiritual center, and then you hear all these things about it, you have to do two things. You have to, in a sense, distance yourself from him, number one, and the other collateral effect about religion, he's been unable to actually secure a church where he can go, because you never know. Did so-and-so speak there? Did so-and-so do that? They have a celebration about X, Y, and Z? And you can vet these churches, but if you become a member, it becomes a sense you embrace everything that church has ever done or will ever do. And his now spiritual life is, when they spend the weekend away from the White House, Camp David, and other places like that, but and going to a church but not becoming a member. And I didn't put it in here, but it's a very interesting thing I wanted to show tomorrow, but I'm not going to show it. This past summer, he was on the vineyard, and he was golfing, right? And the Boston Herald ran a front page story about him golfing. And the implication was, oh, he's golfing on Sunday. Is he really then a Muslim? He doesn't have a religion, you know, why would he be golfing on Sunday, right? The whole idea, it brought up in 2011, again, about, you know, where he really stood on those issues. The other thing in the campaign that people may forget, we keep thinking about this birthers issue as something that happened just before or after he was elected. Actually, in the summer of 2008, just before he was elected, it says Pennsylvania's former Deputy Attorney General and Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton's supporter Philip J. Berg filed a lawsuit in federal court in Pennsylvania accusing presumptive Democratic presidential candidate Senator Barack Obama of lying about his U.S. citizenship, which would make him ineligible to be president. And it just mushroomed, right? The whole idea that he's not a real citizen. And in fact, if you saw this, part of the press says, look, this is a guy who was in a madrasa. That's him on the left, on your left. That's a school when he was in Indonesia. It's not a madrasa that they claimed that it was. And on the right, that says, of course he's a Muslim. Look what he's wearing. Look under what he's wearing. He's wearing the old khakis and the polo shirt and his watch when he goes to Kenya, and they want him to put on something on top of it for a ceremony. But oh, he must be a Muslim. Look at him. He looks like one, doesn't he? And how that went. And this was one of the all kicker. This is the Fox News. This is after the great speech he gave, Ed Hill see this and said, what is this, a fist bump, a pound, a terrorist fist jab? The gesture everyone seems to interpret differently, she said. That shows that some very interesting body communication, find out what it really says, right? It says, go honey, go. Right? But that wasn't the interpretation. I mean, everything took on a life of his own. Everything he did was interpreted in terms of race or religion, and he's not one of us. And then you might have seen the cover story that was one of the cover magazines had Barack dressed as Osama bin Laden, New Yorker, and Michelle dressed with the guns, the Angela Davis look, right? All this visual. The story was a terrific story. But it's hard to get past the New Yorker cover page to get to the story because people would just look at that cover page. I knew it. I knew they were Muslims, right? And not to the heart of what was actually happening. And some of this was, it's a question of interpretation. Will it stay with anybody? When Robert Croft was interviewing Senator Clinton when they were running for office, he said you take Senator Obama at his word that he's not a Muslim. Right. You don't believe that he's a Muslim? No. Why would I? There's nothing to base that on, as far as I know, right? The little things that somebody said, well, she's not sure, maybe he is a Muslim, and it became a great distraction. And then as she was in the lead, she had her own challenges. It's interesting, Hillary is a very powerful woman running for office and serving the country. When she was being attacked, I said, why are you being attacked? She said, I don't think they're piling on me because I'm a woman. I think they're piling on me because I'm winning, she told reporters. I anticipate it's going to get even hotter, and if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. It's very much at home in the kitchen, as she said. And then you may remember this episode where she's talking about after New Hampshire, and there was this, just an emotional moment, and it received incredible criticism later on from different reporters. Maureen Dowd said there was a poignancy about the moment, seeing Hillary crack with exhaustion from decades of yearning to be the principal rather than the plus one. But there was a whiff of Nixonian self-pity about her choking up. What was moving her so deeply was her recognition that the country was failing to grasp how much it needs her. In a weirdly narcissistic way, she was crying for us, but it was grimly typical of her that what finally made her break down was the prospect of losing. Very critical. Jesse Jackson Jr. was even more critical. Here's what he said on MSNBC. We saw something very clever in the last week of this campaign. We saw a sensitivity factor, something that Mrs. Clinton has not been able to do with voters that she tried in New Hampshire. Not in response to voters, not in response to Katrina, not in response to other issues that have devastated the American people, the war in Iraq. We saw tears in response to her appearance. So her appearance brought her to tears, but not Hurricane Katrina. That's to tell you about the issues of gender and race and how they played, a very unfair, I think, critical. And I don't know if this video shows, this is I would say, the debate from hell. Both Cornel West and I assisted Senator Obama in preparing for this one. This was at Howard University. He was actually great. I don't have a clip, I didn't put it in there. But he talked about Thurgood Marshall, how much he's standing on the foot of great leaders, and that he's at Howard University, glad to be it. But remember, there were 10. Who remembers? There were 10 Democrats running for presidency in 2007 and 8. And here is a comment that Hillary Clinton made that made her win the debate, which is very interesting about how
you know,
really
it is hard to disagree with anything that has been said, but let me just put this in perspective. If HIV/AIDS were the leading cause of death of white women between the ages of 25 and 34, there would be an outraged outcry in this country.
See all those sisters, hallelujah. And what makes it so interesting, it's clear, would there have been an outcry? It may be so, but the whole idea was, Gwen Ifill asked the question, HIV is a problem for black women, is anyone concerned about it? And she turned it in a very positive way, saying if race had been an issue, it would make a big difference, race and gender, and it captured this black women's crowd in a positive way. The next thing that happened, that we were in South Carolina, and it was a very tough state for Barack Obama to win. Why? It's understandable. Race mattered again in a different way. When Barack Obama went to South Carolina in 2007, remember the black politicians and black clergy said, we don't even know this kid from Illinois by the name of Obama. We know Bill Clinton, he's a Southerner, he's our former president, so we support Hillary Clinton. We know John Edwards, remember John Edwards? His father was from South Carolina. Barack Obama, we don't know him, and he has no black vote in South Carolina. And remember that Al Sharpton never won South Carolina, but Jesse Jackson did, right? And here's what Bill Clinton said after the Barack Obama won the Democratic primary. Reporter said, what does it say about Barack Obama that it takes two of you to beat him? And here's what Bill Clinton said. He laughed, that's just bait too. Jesse Jackson won South Carolina twice, in '84 and '88. And he ran a good campaign. And Senator Obama ran a good campaign here. He's run a good campaign everywhere. He's a good candidate with a good organization. And my sense is that that's just as straight. You know, he's like Jesse Jackson, did a good job. There was a furor behind this saying, Clinton is subtly playing the race card. Right? Of course a black's going to win in South Carolina. So he never said that, but that was the implication that he was, in a sense, without saying it, using race. And then he finally shot back. And he was talking on station WHYY about what he said about Jesse Jackson compared to Barack Obama. And here's what he said. He says, I think that they played the race card on me. And we now know from memos from the campaign and everything that they planned it to do it all along. I was stating a fact, and it's still a fact. So his point was that there was a reaction that he's playing the race card, and he's denying it in strong levels. And here's how the national press viewed his victory in South Carolina. And this Washington Post editorial. The racial divide has deepened in South Carolina, with Barack Obama leading Hillary Clinton by a wide margin among African Americans, but badly trailing both Clinton and John Edwards among white voters. The poll released Thursday evening has Obama outpacing Clinton among black voters 59% to 25%, but barely getting to double digits among whites. African Americans make up about half of all voters in the 2004 South Carolina Democratic primary. So the whole idea was this was a black state supporting a black candidate, but whites were not behind him. And people know that he ultimately won that military. It's hard for you to see this, but if I can go back, let me go back. If you look at the bottom, this is Virginia, a southern state, and go back to January 2008. McCain was at 45% to Barack's 43%. In February of that same year, McCain was 49% to Barack's 44%. And you see it goes up and down at the end, just before the election. In October, a month before the election, McCain was down to 47% and Barack was up to 50%. So you can see that in Virginia, a state that doesn't have an overwhelmingly large African American population, was supporting Obama by the fall of 2008. If you go to North Carolina, which was a big surprise state, again, and you look at the early data, you see that in March, that Obama is leading Clinton for the primaries. In April, he's over 50% with 56%, and later in April, he's at 51%. And he ultimately had a 49 to 40% benefit in North Carolina. A lot of this came crashing down. Remember his sort of quiet conversation in San Francisco that somebody was recording, just like somebody's recording what I'm saying today? He said, our challenge is to get people persuaded that we can make progress when there's not evidence of that in their daily lives. You go into some of the small towns in Pennsylvania where he's about to go, and like a lot of small towns in the Midwest, the jobs have gone now for 25 years and nothing's replacing. And they fell through the Clinton administration and the Bush administration, each successive administration, that has somehow these communities are going regenerate, and they have not. And it's not surprising that they are bitter. They cling to guns or religion or antipathy to people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment or anti-trade sentiment as a way to explain their frustrations. What you didn't see is that a very similar comment was made by Bill Clinton about poor whites, but this one had a tinge to it. It made an immediate difference in how people responded. And Hillary Clinton shot up in Pennsylvania as Barack's numbers went down. And here's what she said a month later, before the primary in Pennsylvania. She says, I have a much broader base to build a winning coalition on, she said in an interview with USA Today. Clinton cited an Associated Press article that found how Senator Obama's support among hard-working Americans, white Americans, is weakening again, and now whites in both states who have not completed college were supporting me. There's a pattern emerging here. So played into the race, not just working, but hard-working Americans, white Americans are supporting me and not him, and the race subtly comes into this issue as well. And Geraldine Ferraro, God bless her soul, was the most blunt and direct about this issue, having run as a vice presidential candidate. And she said, again, this is in the spring of 2008, if Obama was a white man, he would not be in this position. And if he was a woman of any color, he would not be in this position. He happens to be very lucky to be who he is. And the country is caught up in this concept. That is, they're supporting him because he's a black male, I guess, right? And she went on to say a few days later, anytime anybody does anything that in any way pulls this campaign down and says, let's address reality and the problems we're facing in this world, you're accused of being racist, so you have to shut up. Racism works in two different directions. I really think they're attacking me because I'm white. How's that? But you can see how race played an issue, and it only heated up. As a result of all this, by August of 2008, you may have forgotten that actually John McCain had a 5-point lead over Obama in the U.S. presidential race because of what they thought he could do with the economy, but it also showed that McCain started attacking Obama about his experience and criticized his position on offshore drilling and mocked his overseas trip to Hawaii. I mean, negative campaign made a difference. It's not about race, it's just about the attractiveness. This is one of the classiest, and I hope you can hear all of this, is one of the classiest comments that were made.
He's an Arab. He is not. No?
No, ma'am. He's a decent family man, citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues, and that's what this campaign is all about. He's not. Thank you. Thank you.
No, he's not a Muslim. He's a decent family man, citizen. Now, that becomes important. I want to show you this. Let me just be clear 1,000 times. This ad was never, ever shown by the McCain campaign, ever. But someone doctored it and put some subliminal messages in it with the same voice from the same ad that was run by the McCain campaign, and see who it targeted and what you think they were.
Celebrity? Yes. Ready to lead? No. Obama's new taxes could break your family budget. The press warns the tax man cometh.
See that?
Obama's taxes mean higher prices at the pump. Obama's taxes, a recipe for economic disaster. Higher taxes, higher gas prices, economic disaster. That's the real Obama.
It says, I'm John McCain and I approve that message. That's not true. He didn't approve that message. But you see the subliminal gangs, guns, this is what you're getting. And you can imagine if someone's watching that somewhere on the internet, they would say, my God, is that what's going to happen? Here's where I conclude, Skip, for today. And this is, I think, the seminal moment in talking about race and religion in 2008 campaign. Colin Powell's a decorated veteran, is an immigrant from Jamaica, a graduate of the City College in New York, was the highest ranking African American in the history. Was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was considered a vice presidential candidate in the early 1900s and then a presidential candidate in the late 1900s, and his wife Alma said, no, I'm not going to allow you to run because I think as a black man you'll be assassinated. She was very clear about her objection, and he didn't run, and he finally announced he was a Republican. and spoke at the Republican National Convention, you may recall, and made two mistakes. He said he supported a woman's right to choose and affirmative action. That was a killer for him to say, to become a national character. But here's a really insightful, it's long, it's about 5 minutes long, interview about Colin Powell's able to parse the issue of religion in a way that people can understand, and why, to him, what he ultimately did was endorse Senator Barack Obama for presidency, and he'll tell you what it was that turned
General Powell, last year you gave a campaign contribution to Senator McCain. You have met twice at least with Barack Obama. Are you prepared to make a public declaration of which of these two candidates that you're prepared to support?
Yes, but let me lead into it this way. I know both of these individuals very well now. I've known John for 25 years, as your setup said, and I've gotten to know Mr. Obama quite well over the past 2 years. Both of them are distinguished Americans who are patriotic, who are dedicated to the welfare of our country. Either one of them, I think, would be a good president. I have said to Mr. McCain that I admire all he has done. I have some concerns about the direction that the party has taken in recent years. It has moved more to the right than I would like to see it, but that's a choice the party makes. And I've said to Mr. Obama, you have to pass a test of, do you have enough experience, and do you bring the judgment to the table that would give us confidence that you would be a good president? And I've watched them over the past 2 years, frankly, and I've had this conversation with them. I have especially watched over the last 6 or 7 weeks, as both of them have really taken a final exam with respect to this economic crisis that we are in and coming out of the conventions. And I must say that I've gotten a good measure of both. In the case of Mr. McCain, I found that he was a little unsure as to how to deal with the economic problems that we were having. And almost every day there was a different approach to the problem, and that concerned me. It's got the sensing that he didn't have a complete grasp of the economic problems that we had. And I was also concerned at the selection of Governor Palin. She's a very distinguished woman, and she's to be admired. But at the same time, now that we have had a chance to watch her for some 7 weeks, I don't believe she's ready to be President of the United States, which is the job of the Vice President. And so that raised some question in my mind as to the judgment that Senator McCain made. On the Obama side, I watched Mr. Obama, and I watched him during this 7-week period, and he displayed a steadiness, an intellectual curiosity, a depth of knowledge, and an approach to looking at problems like this and picking a vice president that I think is ready to be president on day one, and also in not just jumping in and changing every day, but showing intellectual vigor. I think that he has a definitive way of doing business that would serve us well. I also believe that on the Republican side, over the last 7 weeks, the approach to the Republican Party and Mr. McCain has become narrower and narrower. Mr. Obama, at the same time, has given us a more inclusive, broader reach into the needs and aspirations of our people. He's crossing lines, ethnic lines, racial lines, generational lines. He's thinking about all villages have values, all towns have values, not just small towns have values. And I've also been disappointed, frankly, by some of the approaches that Senator McCain has taken recently, or his campaign has, on issues that are not really central to the problems that the American people are worried about. This Bill Ayers situation that's been going on for weeks became something of a central point of the campaign. But Mr. McCain says that he's a washed-out terrorist. But then why do we keep talking about him? And why do we have these robocalls going on around the country trying to suggest that because of this very, very limited relationship that Senator Obama has had with Mr. Ayers, somehow Mr. Obama is tainted? What they're trying to connect him to is some kind of terrorist feelings. And I think that's inappropriate. Now, I understand what politics is all about. I know how you can go after one another, and that's good. But I think this goes too far. And I think it has made the McCain campaign look a little narrow. It's not what the American people are looking for. And I look at these kinds of approaches to the campaign, and they trouble me. And the party has moved even further to the right, and Governor Palin has indicated a further rightward shift. I would have difficulty with 2 more conservative appointments to the Supreme Court, but that's what we'd be looking at in a McCain administration. I'm also troubled by not what Senator McCain says, but what members of the party say. And it is permitted to be said such things as, well, you know that Mr. Obama is a Muslim. Well, the correct answer is he is not a Muslim. He's a Christian. He's always been a Christian. But the really right answer is, what if he is? Is there something wrong with being a Muslim in this country? The answer is no, that's not America. Is there something wrong with some 70-year-old Muslim American kid believing that he or she could be president? Yet I have heard senior members of my own party drop this suggestion. He's a Muslim and he might be associated with terrorists. This is not the way we should be doing it in America. I feel strongly about this particular point because of a picture I saw in a magazine. It was a photo essay about troops who were serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. And one picture at the tail end of this photo essay was of a mother in Arlington Cemetery. And she had her head on the headstone of her son's grave. And as the picture focused in, you could see the writing on the headstone. And it gave his awards, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, showed that he died in Iraq, gave his date of birth, his date of death. He was 20 years old. And then at the very top of the headstone, it didn't have a Christian cross. It didn't have a Star of David. It had a crescent and a star of the Islamic faith. And his name was Kareem Rashad Sultan Khan. And he was an American. He was born in New Jersey. He was 14 years old at the time of 9/11. And he waited until he can go serve his country, and he gave his life. Now, we have got to stop polarizing ourselves in this way. And John McCain is as non-discriminatory as anyone I know. But I'm troubled about the fact that within the party, we have these kinds of expressions. So when I look at all of this, and I think back to my Army career, we've got two individuals, either one of them could be a good president. But which is the president that we need now? Which is the individual that serves the needs of the nation for the next period of time? And I come to the conclusion that because of his ability to inspire, because of the inclusive nature of his campaign, because he is reaching out all across America, because of who he is and his rhetorical abilities, and we have to take that into account, as well as his substance. He has both style and substance. He has met the standard of being a successful president, being an exceptional president. I think he is a transformational figure. He is a new generation coming into the world, onto the world stage, onto the American stage, and for that reason, I'll be voting for Senator Barack Obama.
It turned the tide. I mean, it really was significant. I think it had a lot of independents and people who were unsure. Particularly, we were in two wars, and it was a very tough time in 2008. Can you trust this young 40-something Democrat with only 4 years, less than 4 years in the Senate, to take on the global role of being commander-in-chief? That endorsement made an enormous amount of difference to those who were willing to listen and still had their minds open. And then November 4th, it all happened. This is the president and his family in Grant Park in Chicago. I was not in Grant Park. I was in New York. Now, it's not a funny story, it's a serious story. I was in New York because some of you may remember that when they had the Democratic primary in New York, the results came out and Barack Obama had not received a single vote from Harlem. And I said, something's wrong with this. I can't believe that everybody in Harlem voted against him. All these districts had zero. And then it was about 3 weeks later that they said, there was a glitch in machinery. Here's the numbers. He did very well. Hillary won New York, of course. But the reality was that my sense is that we can't let this happen again. And my daughter, Rashida, who's now a lawyer, said, Dad, you should go on this show. You know, they really want you. I said, what show? They want you to go with, who was it? Jon Stewart and Colbert, both of them. I said, who are they? He said, Dad, just don't ask questions, just go, right? So that's where I spent my November 4th talking about the election and talked about Michelle more than Barack Obama. And so this is just a sense, this is mainly national, but the world turned the enthusiasm about his election in 2008. And you see how many states he won, and you'll see tomorrow, he won Florida, he won North Carolina, he won Virginia, he won Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, New Jersey, and all those were states that were not clearly Obama states. He had a lot of work to do to get there, But you can also see the divisive nature. He was successful in getting votes in some normally red states, which made an enormous amount of difference. And you can see that challenge. And so people put aside the red-blue, even though I have it here, to try to figure out who's the best person to run the country. And that's where the fun about race just began. So stay tuned tomorrow. We'll see what happens on the day of inauguration, January 2009, how Barack Obama had a stumble that began the inauspicious 3 years that he's been in the White House, and that I think is going to be a sense about what's happening in the future. So there's more tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you. That worked perfectly. That worked.
Great. Tree, you'll answer some questions?
Yes, absolutely.
Questions, comments. Tree, let me start.
Yeah.
There's a sense, I was very interested to see the audience's reaction. And I was wondering whether people would applaud at the end of Colin Powell.
Mm-hmm.
And in part because, the audience acted like, in a sense, this was just happening, right? He was just endorsing him, and it was a good thing. There is a tone in literature. It's called the elegy. When the subject's passed, you do the lament. And there is a tone to your lectures. Now, I know that you definitely believe there's going to be a Barack II. But for all of us, I think we are remembering the good times.
Yep.
Before the fall. So my question to you is: one, do you think that that's a fair assessment? But two, describe to us the resurrection.
Yeah, it's interesting. Let me talk about...
Because I know you believe there will be a Barack II.
Yeah, but I guess you want me to talk about the crucifixion first, right? And then the resurrection. Right. What's interesting is that it's a very tough time to run the country for anybody, right? And there is the good thing about democracy is that people have come out to express their views. Occupy Wall Street, the Tea Party. I'm starting something called the Coffee Party tomorrow. But the whole idea is that people are taking it upon themselves to be heard wherever they can because they're frustrated, and they should be frustrated. And there's no debate that President Obama inherited a lot of that. The problem didn't start in 2009 in January. It started much earlier. And in some sense, it's hard to say, well, in the 1990s, Clinton did a great job, but look what Obama's doing. I think it's much more nuanced and complicated than that. And why is there going to be a resurrection? Here's my sense, and I'll talk about it a little bit tomorrow. That is, and he's not here today, the professor talked about, is Obama a socialist, and I said no. That is that he's tried to do a large number of things under a very difficult set of circumstances, and maybe selected some people that weren't best for the times, but we rolled through some of that, and now it's going to be what's going to happen to change the economy. He's still very charismatic, even though you see these stories saying the young people who supported him in 2008 aren't as enthusiastic in 2012. Well, the 14-year-olds from 2008 are enthusiastic in 2012 because they see the differences, the differences, that we have to do something to help others. And I think that's part of what's going to make an enormous amount of difference. I think as well, it's a fortunate time that if you were to ask literally, Skip, the Ronald Reagan question, and that is going to be in the book, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? A lot of people will say no, right? Because of unemployment, foreclosures. I've seen it personally. I give scholarships to my 2 high schools in Merced, and for kids going to college. I was shocked to see the number of children at a public high school, black and white, telling me my mother lost her job as a supervisor at Burger King. And we're homeless now. Those things never happened before. And so it's real that people are definitely unhappy with what's going on. But he has the ability to convince people that he can do things, and I think he will. The reality is that you have choices. If there's somebody better, I'd really like to see if there's going to be a Democrat to run against him. It won't happen. Well, of course, you'll get the usual folks running, but the reality, there was some talk about that. He got stronger and stronger and stronger because of the very strong opposition of Hillary Clinton, who was a terrific candidate, and so was her party. So I think that test is coming, but he's doing it himself right now because, as I said yesterday, which was before the election today tomorrow, that he has had the smart judgment, strategic judgment, to go into the states where he's losing. Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, all those states are suffering now. And he has no reluctance to go into the places to tell them, here's what I believe, etc. He will have to announce a multi-million-dollar jobs plan of his own very soon. That's unavoidable. A multi-million person, multi-billion dollars, but multi-million person job plan that's going to put people back to work. So, and and it may have to be, you taxpayers may cringe at this, it may have to be over $1 trillion. So we keep talking about the money that was spent in the 2009, 2010. It was a drop in the bucket. It wasn't enough to transform the economy. It slowed down some of the negative aspects, but it wasn't enough to make it so that people could get jobs even at lower rates. So that's part of it. So I think that's going to be the challenge that he faces in 2012.
Great. Let's open it up. Professor Wilson, would you like a comment or question?
There's a microphone.
I didn't have my hand up, but I have a comment.
We could see you thinking.
Right. So, a lot of us are concerned about the possibility that Obama might not be reelected, but I think he will be, primarily because of the opposition. Republicans have put up some terrible candidates. But the question I have, Tree, is why has Obama done such an incredibly bad job of framing the issues? Take the health care bill. The White House has really done a terrible job of defending the bill, making it clear to the American people that over the long run they would benefit. The Congressional Budget, OMB, I should say, and the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities did a rigorous analysis of the long-run implications of the bill and had some compelling data that the health care bill will reduce the deficit in the long run, not increase it. And if you look at the individual items of the bill, according to 2 recent public opinion polls, a substantial majority of Americans support the individual items, yet they're against the overall bill. Now, that's ridiculous. And I just think that the Obama administration has done a very, very poor job of defending the health care bill, letting the Republicans run with Obamacare and so on. That's one thing. Secondly, the Republicans have put issues on a platter that would enable Obama to reveal their true nature, that they do not address the concerns of ordinary Americans. Now, he's only now beginning to spell this out. Why has he done such an incredibly, this is my question. Why has Obama, who was so articulate during the campaign, so persuasive, so compelling, why has he done such an incredibly poor job of framing the issues so that they would resonate with the American public?
I want to answer the second question, what's changed about him. And I answered it yesterday, but I want to repeat it today. Then I want to talk about health care and the jobs bill in terms of some major failings in communication skills since the election. And I say this with great heartfelt sympathy for the president's goal in being someone, as I said at the beginning, trying to unify everybody. And I think that's a strategy that I understand, but you have to understand that the day he was elected, there were people saying, we have to make him a one-term president. And we're going to oppose anything he does because we can't give him the power to become a 2-term president. And why? I want you to take a look. Think about North Carolina and Ohio and Virginia and Pennsylvania and Indiana and New Jersey. It was unthinkable early in 2008 that he could win those states, right? Because, what was he going to do? And as he said in that 2004 Democratic National Committee speech, he really thought he could bring everybody together. I think that's still in it. You know him, Bill. I think that's in his heart and his soul, that I'm not just a Democrat. And it's not an ego. I'm here for everybody. And he went to every county in Illinois when he ran for state senate, places where people told him, it's don't go there. People aren't going to accept you. It's going to be dangerous. But that's who he is. He was that way. Ken Mack had to leave with the Harvard Law Review, bringing everybody in. So is there a difference between the person who I knew 30 years ago, 20-some years ago as a student, and then as a candidate for state office and the presidency? Yes. In the sense that the strategy that might have been used and effective to get him into the White House was not the strategy that's going to make him successful. And I said yesterday, when people ask him, what is he reading? He's reading about Abraham Lincoln and others. And I can't remember the woman's name. I think she's here again today. But to me, I'm not putting this on him, but a person who did an incredible amount in politics was Lyndon Johnson. Right? And he did it saying, I don't care what you think about me. He said, I might lose the South because of this. He had pressure from a king, right? Dr. King. But Lyndon Johnson did some remarkable things as president that cost him the second term, right? He says, I don't care what you say about the 64 Civil Rights Act, or the 65 Voting Rights Act, or the 68 Public Accommodations Act, or the speech he gave at Howard University about the disparity between blacks and whites in the early 1960s after the assassination of President Kennedy. So that's what we're just beginning to see. The personality that says, like Johnson, all I need is one vote more than you, right? And I'm sure that Reagan and Bush and even Clinton had that mentality. I'm not going to pull the whole country together, but if I can get one vote more than you, I'm going to do what I think is right. Reagan's Supreme Court appointments, Bush's Supreme Court appointments. And I think that's part of it as well. So, and I think he's changed that. Is it enough time? Time will tell. He's changed because he's realized that, wow, they won't even vote for something that's modest, that helps the most needy people, and that talks about the role of American government. They want help police officers, firefighters, teachers. That's not about, trying to help. That's about politics. No, we're going to show you didn't do anything to help people, and that the economy is falling apart, more jobs are lost, and so that's part of it. The second part, I completely agree with you on the messaging. And it was so effective in 2008, running for office. And the problem is that the health care bill is voluminous, it's over 1,000 pages, but is understandable in 2 pages. And that idea, here's what you get, and here's what takes effect. It's very simple, but to try to explain it, they've done a terrible job of letting people know this helps you, right? It's also, the thing we haven't talked about, it helps.
Not just the people who don't have insurance.
Right, people who have insurance, exactly. And it helps the African American community substantially in this debate. Well, I can't do anything for African Americans unless I'm going to do it for all Americans. But the reality is that we're at the bottom of the rung, so we're going to benefit from it.
Charles, how can a campaign, a man and consequently administration, so powerfully effective at communication, fall flat on his face in terms of communication after winning?
I'm not going to mention any names, but there's an enormous difference, as I'll say in the book, between campaigning for office and running government. And I'll cite one name, and that's what was Clinton's alter ego, Carville. James Carville would call it like it was. Right? I mean, you may not agree with him, but he was plain spoken. He communicated well. Every problem Clinton had, give it to Carville. He took care of it. But he wasn't in the White House.
And it was funny.
They said, "Do you still have contact with Obama?"
Yes.
Tell him to listen to Elizabeth Warren's tapes on campaigning. Man, she has framed the issues so beautifully, and she's got people all excited. I mean, just tell them to listen so they can pick up some pointers.
We're moving that. I just introduced Elizabeth last week at a fundraiser in Cambridge for that same reason, because she has a chance to change the way people think about it. But she still has some work to do, right? And the work is that people keep thinking that Scott Brown is, there's fewer Republicans in Massachusetts, there are more Democrats, and so she can win. Well, no. Scott Brown woke up a lot of Reagan Democrats. right? And the moderate side of him. And so you can't assume that since the state is 60, 70% registered Democrats that he has no chance of winning. He has a big chance of winning, and she's going to need a lot of support, and she's got to go into those communities where he went in, where all the people voted for him because his opponent then, Martha Coakley, didn't go where he went.
You know why they're getting scared? She's gone into some of those communities.
Yep.
And her message resonates.
Absolutely, right, absolutely, absolutely.
I'm a bit surprised you haven't talked about hip hop yet.
That's tomorrow.
Oh, that's tomorrow.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to miss that. So.
I'll talk about it now too. I'll say something about it. We talked about it at dinner last night.
Yeah, well, you know, one of the things that I really found just enlightening and you know, about the Obama campaign was that so many young people found a way to get past their beliefs about government and authority and vote for Obama. And I do believe that that'll happen again. I also thought it was interesting that so many people understood that he knew something about hip hop, because he is of the age where if you drive your kids around, you hear it. And so I wasn't surprised that many people got it at a certain level. What I wondered, though, is why it didn't turn on him, you know, effectively. It's only, a few months ago that anything happened, and that was the sort of silly attack on Common in the White House, because, I mean, it was just ridiculous, and so it made the Republicans and Fox News look even, you know, just ignorant. But, you know, the question is, so why is it that hip-hop worked for him, and the brushing the shoulder got him a lot of cred, and on and on and on? And do you see that becoming more important in this next round?
I answer that in two ways. First of all, the hip-hop community supports him hands down. There's no question about that. They did in the campaign. They're going to be on the campaign trail again next year, doing fundraisers and reaching out to young people, getting out the vote for young people. Even though the polls say they're not interested, they won't do it. It's a new generation, and I think that the choices will be stark and clear, right, in what he's been able to do. And we talked about last night, one of the interesting things is that when he was a senator, he said, "Oh, my favorite movie is the HBO series The Wire. Oh, and I love Omar, the character." And the moment that he said he had to back off, well, I don't like his violence, you know, right? Because that was going to be the kind of picture, right? Here's Obama, here's Omar with a shotgun, a sawed-off shotgun, and, right? And so he had to sort of embrace it, right? And at the same time distance himself from it, because again, it was the race, the game. You saw that video, how people will turn it around and take the worst of Omar, a fictional character, and make it pin him to Obama. That's Obama, right? That's part of it. So he's going to have people who are supporting him at certain places, and they are good at drawing out the crowds. He's going to draw out the biggest crowd, but when he has those other people introducing him or saying something, it's going to make an enormous amount of difference in what he's able to do. And I hope that I hope people listen to Colin Powell, right? Because what Colin Powell said in 2008 is just as relevant in 2012. The whole idea, we're one America, and we've got to get beyond these caricatures of people, and we can't let things that are not true about religion or about race be an impediment to us doing what's right for ourselves. And I think that has to be the battle ground as we go forward. Yep.
Charles, great job. Please, let's thank Charles Ogletree.
Is it 6 o'clock already?